welcome everyone who can make it. I guess in this time of plague, a lot of people are deciding how to work remotely, and they have to work remotely. And we usually do a hack night, but we can't really do that because, well, it's not going to work. So we're going to just do Zoom, and we're going to do a little developer Q&A session over Zoom. So the plan for the panel is to go through some topics about working remotely. Specifically as a developer, and specifically right now, I feel like right now it's a little different than just simply working remotely. Carbon 5 tends to be a pretty collaboration-heavy work environment, so we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to collaborate as a developer in this environment, and not just other engineers, but also managers, designers, product managers, anyone else who's involved in the software development process. So there's 2 of you, but I guess I'll just make this announcement and maybe remake it later. There's a Q&A feature on the webinar, and so that's kind of how we're going to field questions. Our sort of invisible person behind the curtains, Brandy, will kind of forward those questions and bring them up so that we can actually talk about things that people want to talk about, especially if we're not talking about them. Also, there's a chat. Chat might be useful for like, hey, here's a cool website or a tool I use or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's much else to say about the logistics other than use the QA function if you want to speak up. We could also let you speak if that makes sense. Since there's only a few of you, that seems totally reasonable. All right, so let's get into it. This is kind of experimental, so bear with us. So Carbon 5, the company I work for, is a collaborative software place, and we work with a lot of companies. We do a lot of collaborative and very, I would say, effective software engineering. And so we have offices all over the place, San Francisco, Santa Monica, Chattanooga, New York City, which is where me and a few of the people in this call are based, and Seattle as well. Also, we have a code of conduct if you don't know how to act in public, which still applies over the internet. Please read it. I can put it in the chat if you're interested in learning how to behave in public, but hopefully you all know that. All right, so introductions. Myself, my name is Lindsay Kowalick. I've been a developer for a little over 6 years, and I've been at Carbon 5 for about 2.5. I have some kind of spurious experience working remotely. Especially when I first moved to New York, like a little over 3.5 years ago. And I've definitely worked with a lot of distributed teams where some people are remote and some people aren't. I usually host the Hack Nights, but that's obviously not happening, so I'm doing this instead. I will pass it off to Eric.
All right, thank you, Lindsay, and thanks for inviting me to this talk. I'm Eric Iseneker. I work at Carbon 5 as a software engineer alongside Lindsay. I've been engineering in the New York area for around 10 years on and off. Most of that has been in person. I have had some kind of freelancey stints where I have worked remotely, and kind of the way that I've done that has changed over the years, and this is just another iteration in my mind about how to work remotely. Evelyn?
Hey everybody, my name is Evelyn Masso. I'm a software developer. I've done some design work. I also like to do some teaching and like mentorship kinds of things. I currently work at GitHub on GitHub Desktop, and I also contribute to P5GS, an open source creative coding library. I'm located in Los Angeles, and thanks for having me. Pass it to Casey.
Hi, everybody. Lindsay, thanks for organizing this and putting up all that effort to get everything set up. My name is Casey. I'm a developer, backend developer on the Coinbase Pro team. And I've been a software developer for probably a really long time. It seems I was just thinking about that since the early to mid 90s. Yeah, I've really worked on a lot of different things, and I've worked remotely now for 13 or 14 years. I work remotely out of the Denver area, and I've been working for companies in California for quite some time. And over the years, I've sort of evolved my setup a little bit and sort of, I think, gotten a pretty good routine where I can actually do that full time and keep my sanity, which is good. But yeah, and that's about it for me.
So if Chris or Shirley, if you want to, just say if you're, working remotely as a developer or anything like that, talk about yourself a little, that's totally fine. just because we don't have that many people. I think it makes sense to just kind of involve everyone instead of just having a panel of people.
Yeah, hi, I'll go first. My name is Chris. I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm an engineer, a real engineer, well, no, not a real engineer, a mechanical engineer by education, worked in that field for 20 years and decided I needed to do something different for, mental sanity. So I found a coding web boot camp by Savvy Coders and attended that, graduated, I guess, in February, and have been kind of hunting an entry-level position since. So I figured attending this and trying to learn more about working remotely might help me when the time comes, if I do find a position and end up working remotely. So anything to get a kind of a leg up.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Yeah, I think I'm kind of curious about the hiring aspects in this environment. It seems like it's kind of dying down, but I think the logistics of it are kind of interesting. So maybe we can get into that. Shirley, do you want to talk or?
Yeah, I'll talk. My name is Shirley. I'm currently a boot camp student at LaGuardia Community College with their tech hire program. So I don't know, I'm pretty much a student at the moment learning more about backend at the moment with Java, but I'm more towards looking into front end. But reason why I joined here is just to see more insight on thinking about after I graduate if remote work would be for me, and just to see some tips and more insights on those who are currently software engineers and software developers, just more insight of what one currently does, and yeah, pretty much that's it.
All right, so we're just going to get into this. So I think one of the weird things about remote work is trying to stay productive for lots of reasons. I think maybe just logistical reasons, collaborative reasons, I guess mental health kind of gets into that too. And so I was kind of curious what people, what tools or techniques anyone has used that have names or we could talk about that really allow you to stay productive as a developer working remotely.
I can go.
Sure.
This is Eric. I don't actually have a vocabulary for my tool set right now, and maybe there is one. I've found myself really more focused than usual, and I think a part of that is, actually sequestering myself in a space where, strangely there are no people. And just for background, Carbon 5 works in a pretty open workspace, and we're all encouraged to, interact and bounce questions, ideas, and just sort of, water cooler talk with each other. And, as much as I hate to say it, I think taking that away has helped me stay on task a bit better, especially if I'm working on a pretty severe problem. Just the tool of, isolation and being in my own headspace for, 10, 20, even 30 minutes at a time, I think has actually been my strongest tool so far in this experience.
So I guess, I don't know if we want to use the buzzword Pomodoro technique, but is that a reasonable approximation to what you're doing? Or it's concentrated work for a period of time and then kind of taking a break, walking around, and then kind of going back to it?
Yeah, I'd say the break part is where I deviate a lot for probably better and worse. But yeah, I'd say certainly the ability to work without interruption matches up.
I'd say for me, simple, as I've sort of tried some things over the years, I find that some of the simplest things work the best. And a lot of the tools that, I wind up using the most are the kind of free tools you can find anywhere as far as tech goes. But I think actually even more important than that are some of the sort of physical and mental things, tools wise, that you just sort of build up over time. In particular, I had some pretty poor setups early on, just didn't know any better, and just worked crazy hours and with bad ergonomics and everything, and eventually got old enough where that actually mattered. When you're young and you sort of just can, abuse your body, and your body doesn't fight you back so much, you can get away with it. But so I think that more recently, like, I've been much more aggressive about, if I'm not comfortable, I, invest in tools like, a better desk setup, or, just rearranging things, and I don't passively just let it happen anymore. I bought recently, like last year, a standing desk for the first time, even though I had friends that, it's funny, I had some friends that I used to work at Heroku, and there was a contingent of people there who had like treadmill desks, which I thought was like crazy. And then we sort of would poke lighthearted fun at them, and because they would always be in the conferences together, and like they would always be, walking during meetings and stuff, which I thought was pretty funny. But they really enjoyed it, and I haven't gotten quite that far. And I honestly, with my standing desk, I probably still sit 95% of the time. But it's great to be able to, like, for those moments when I can't take a break, but I want to be in a different, sort of posture, I can easily do it, which is really nice. Another thing I did was I got rid of my mouse, which was driving me crazy for years. And I went through like a whole bunch of different mice, like really expensive ones and stuff. And finally, I just said, you know what, this is just not comfortable. So I taught myself how to use a Wacom tablet as a mouse, which is actually harder than you might think. Like the first time I tried to use it, I felt like I wasn't sober. Like I couldn't even click on anything. It was horrible. And I was like, this is never going to work. But eventually, I would say after about 3 or 4 days, like I would never go back to a mouse. Like it just, and I have to use a mouse sometimes.
Tablet?
Yes, yeah. So it's like a drawing tablet. It's a smaller one, and they're fairly inexpensive. I mean, they're about the same price as like a medium-priced mouse for, like an entry-level one, because I don't need like a super high-resolution one. But yeah, it's funny. Like I need it for certain things. Like I've been playing Minecraft with my kids who are older, and you can't really use it for that. It just doesn't work. So using a mouse, I get back to that whole like, oh man, this is so uncomfortable. Like after about an hour, I'm like, oh, get me away from this thing. So those are just some simple things. And I think mentally, I'll talk about it some more, but there are just some discipline things that are really helpful as tools.
Yeah, I've noticed, I don't know, so C5, like we're very work from work, and it's funny watching people's kind of desk setups and like work setups evolve over time as they get like more frustrated with stuff. I think it's like, programmers tend to like script things that they do frequently, or like write little helper scripts. And I feel like it's kind of like that, where something just keeps irritating you often enough that you feel like you have to like actually solve this problem, and it's not worth kind of going through the uncomfortable solution for anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes it sneaks up on you, like you have like physical issues, they can be pretty dull and easy to ignore for a while. And then eventually it's just sort of like, this is just, I can't even sit here for an hour and not, feel like I need to stop. So that, don't let it go that far. If you're starting to feel uncomfortable, invest some money, whatever you can, in a good setup, it pays big dividends.
Yeah, and definitely on a super plus one, the getting like a good like physical work setup for yourself. And like when LA went into quarantine, I had been using like basically my kitchen table and like this really terrible small desk that was like the wrong height for me and like tilted poorly, and just like it was like fine enough, because before quarantine I would actually leave my apartment pretty often to work from coffee shops and like other like not actually my home places. But yeah, then I got a standing desk when that happened, because I had been the desk I had in like my kitchen table, I knew kind of weren't cutting it, and since I was going to be using it a lot more, I tried it, and I was like kind of skeptical. I was like, okay, like this will be nice, whatever, but like the feeling at the end of the day after I did that was like so much better than it was before. Like it was a pretty dramatic change for me, and like a day-to-day like physical quality of life. And also, like I would definitely encourage people to, if you are considering purchasing some furniture, like some kind of home office setup, like at least try to lobby your employer if possible to like pitch in for that, or just cover it for you entirely. Like it's not an unreasonable request, and I think a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to navigate the situation. And so like having the feedback that like I need something of a physical setup at home is valuable feedback for them to hear and for them to like act on too.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't really have that much to add because I pretty much just agree with everything. I've definitely like evolved things as time has gone on. The other one is interesting is like Carbon 5 does a lot of like pairing and just collaboration with like actual engineers on writing code. And I guess I think there's a learning curve there that I don't think I was aware of, but has anyone seen like tools, techniques, I don't know, just a way of working with other people remotely, specifically engineers, that they found to be very effective?
I think there's like lots of like pretty basic tools that I think most people probably use, or I don't know, just like to like name some of them, like we'll just use Zoom a lot and just share screens. And if we want to do like multi-keyboard like collaboration, we'll use something like Atom has Teletype and VS Code has VS Code Live Share, I think, or something like that. It's basically the same thing. I've heard of Screen, which is like a reboot of Screen Hero, but I haven't tried it myself yet, but I've heard good things about it.
I actually started using it recently on my project, and I found it to be quite good. Like,
oh, cool.
But I'm one of those people who like I'm really okay with just having somebody share their screen, and then like driver passenger roles gets flipped by somebody just sharing their screen instead. So I don't know like if the collaborative aspects of it, like two mouse kind of thing, is really necessary for me. But I've definitely found that the Screen SO tool has been really good. And just I wasn't super into the whole like Screen Hero like world, but from what I gather, it's pretty good compared to that. I've also tried like back in the day, like Tmux, I think allows you to forward things remotely and things like that. I don't know. I haven't used like VS Code or Atom much, so I haven't used their features, but the screen share is kind of nice because it doesn't matter what, you know. And if you're looking at a browser or something, like VS Code isn't going to really help you, so.
Totally.
Yep.
One of the things that I found really helpful with like the Teletype style like workspace sharing sort of stuff is that I believe, at least in the VS Code one, there's like some feature where you can like follow someone else's cursor. So like someone can take you to a different part of like the code base to like look at some like reference or documentation. And I think it'll also let you share like terminal sessions inside of VS Code. And so like, and I think one thing I really enjoy about that sort of like setup is that you can like be watching what someone's doing, but you can also like go look at your own stuff and then come back and like still be on the same revision and like workspace and stuff like that. But yeah, I think like also I used to work at Carbon 5 a couple of years ago, and I definitely pair a lot less now than I did there. Of course, like I don't know what things are like these days, but I think it's been an interesting learning experience for me because the team I work on GitHub, we're spread by a pretty significant time zone difference. Like our team spans 10 to 12 hours of time zones. And the team that I'm on is not like super large either. So it's like 7 to 10 people like spread across 10 hours. And so like synchronous things like pairing are a lot harder to like navigate logistically just in terms of like timing. And so like maybe we can talk about this more as we go on, but I think there's like, I've definitely learned a lot about asynchronous collaboration too.
Yeah, I definitely found that was true at Heroku, which I think is a pretty similar culture to GitHub. And there's, I think, some folks that have migrated between those companies. But yeah, the time zone issue was a big one. Most of the people at Coinbase are in California, so although some are in New York as well. So there's definitely a little bit better. Yeah, we had a lot of people overseas, and it was pretty hard. We had a fellow on our team who was in Israel, and we had some folks in the UK and stuff. We do have a contingent at Coinbase that are pretty into VS Code. I'm not one of them, but I think some folks are really enjoying it, and I think that's pretty good for the actual like coding collaboration. But I echo that sentiment about just screen sharing is often good enough for like a very large majority of cases when you really just want somebody. Like most of the time, like I'll be like maybe in this sort of a mentoring opportunity or something where it's somebody who a piece of code that I'm pretty familiar with that I'm trying to get somebody up to speed or help them with a project on. And lots of times it's better for them to actually do most of the driving and just for me to sort of help when they either have questions or just point out things.
Yeah, I want the +1 screen is a pretty good option. I used it for about 2 weeks straight shortly after the beta started. And I think I'm with Lindsay and Casey in terms of like how much, like during a remote pairing session, how much like actual shared teletyping occurs. For me, it's more of a like, I'm going to point here if I want to demonstrate something as a navigator. So having a pen tool is super helpful, or just getting really good at like having a vocabulary around line numbers, or kind of like more of a technical vocabulary around a technique that you want to explore. I think the stakes go up quite a bit when you're remote, because you have less of an ability to demonstrate with pseudocode or with your hands.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like one of the things that's interesting about like VS Code share versus like screen share is like sometimes stuff goes totally crazy in like the AWS console or on the website or somewhere where like any kind of like text teletype like option is really just not going to cut it. And like, hey, all our servers are down according to this AWS dashboard is like a thing I might call somebody and want help with, and like a teletype solution is I mean, I guess one could probably try to use that, but I don't think that's the ideal tool.
I wouldn't use it for that, no.
I would prioritize like a copy pasting URLs and hoping they have access to them or something.
Yeah, totally. I think actually you should like add a markdown file to your repo and then like type back and forth. I'm kidding, don't do that. That's
I mean, things like Google Docs and stuff, I mean, I'm going to kind of get into that as like a good like non-developer thing, but for developers, it's like a fantastic way to write down. I've definitely done these crazy things where like in problem mitigation, you'll have to like perform a bunch of basically irreversible steps on possibly a production database. And like just having somebody else with you and just like saying, I'm going to do this, and then saying, yes, that sounds reasonable, and then pressing enter is like so helpful. Mm-hmm. So I feel like collaboratively destructively destroying data without any recourse is very helpful. And I definitely like echo, I don't know, there's like Japanese train conductors who like point at stuff to like help them remember like how to do things. Like I'm very much like, I'm gonna do this. Okay, here's the command. They look at it, I press enter, and it's like, it's total crazy. Like this is very much like full on fire mode, but.
It's always good to increase your bus count.
Yes, exactly. Or like, get yelled at count. Okay, so I think Eric brought this on, and like we've talked about this. I think a lot of time at the workplace, there are water cooler conversations that are related to useful things in regards to engineering. Does anyone have any same way of handling this? Like, I think I've noticed we have like a developer channel at Carbon 5 where people ask like rando questions about stuff. But like, I feel like being able to like eavesdrop on people, which I'm not going to admit that I do, but definitely do. It's added like my knowledge. It's added to my knowledge base and made it clear when my knowledge base would help somebody else out. And I just have no idea how to replicate this remotely.
I do think it's possible a little bit, and sometimes I moonlight on Slack channels that I don't necessarily always participate in. And people, at least at Coinbase, are pretty vocal on Slack, and obviously it's increased a lot since everybody's working remotely now. And there's the water cooler conversations, although they definitely existed in the lunchtime conversations. You know, if they have some sort of a technical slant, we'll generally wind up on Slack somewhere. There's definitely a proliferation of channels of various things. Sometimes it's fun to like, you know, sort of be a fly on the wall and then maybe learn a couple things and then ask a question or point something out or sort of be like, hey, that's really interesting, or just give a reaction to something. I think that, you know, maybe this is a little antithetical to working remotely, but I do find that at least during normal times, like having some cadence of FaceTime is super important. I was probably going to the office every quarter about or so. We typically try to do some sort of a team event every quarter, and that I would try to work out travel around that time. But as far like, there's no substitute for, even though I'm an introvert at heart, like being face-to-face with people to build rapport with them, if nothing else, because, you know, you see the two-dimensional representation of them or their avatar or whatever, and you only know them so well. Yeah, it is that human thing that can't really be replicated. But, you know, I think the tools are getting better. And like, you know, when Slack first came out, you know, they didn't really have a lot of the sort of emoji stuff, and I sort of thought it was silly when it came out, but I actually think it does humanize it quite a lot, even though it's frivolous and things. That's actually a feature. Like it is a frivolous thing, and it actually does communicate something that typing doesn't. So it's actually kind of nice. Or pasting GIFs or just random stuff like that.
Sorry. I've added so many custom emoji to the GitHub workspace, and like one of my like best work friends has added like scads of like blob emoji to the workspace, and it's just, I don't know. Yeah, I super agree that like things that are, because like I think with those kinds of like rapport and like community and culture building things, you have to be like a lot more intentional about them when you're not in person. And so like do things like that, like, you know, on the face are like, you know, silly and like not necessary, are still like super like fun and like helpful and like humanize things a lot. Yeah. I think like Casey said exactly what I was going to say about just like following Slack channels that I don't have any business being in, but like just kind of like snoop on them every now and then.
Sometimes you gotta be in the Java channel. I mean, like, you don't know or care about Java, but sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, important. I think it helps if it's something you like care a little bit about. So like, I don't know what that would be for you, Lindsay, but yeah.
I think I should probably, I don't know. I find like, I should definitely get it. Like, I think the problem is I have this problem where I don't like being in a lot of Slack channels.
Yeah, I have that problem too.
Like, UI to be like overwhelming and confusing, and like it's very hard to like put things in buckets in terms of like, oh, somebody posted. Yes, Eric, hold on. I see that somebody asked a question. We'll get to that in one moment. Yeah, but I think like my obsession with minimalism is conflicted with the like, yes, I should just show up in random channels. And yeah, I guess before we switch topics, Eric mentions, Chris, you asked a question about peer reviews. And I think this kind of gets into the topic of like asynchronous communication in general is really, really helpful for how people work and can be very effective for, I mean, Evelyn's case, you have a team that's distributed over, you know, a pretty large percentage of the Earth's time zones. And I'm sure, Casey, so you've been doing this for a while, and I think like the synchronous communication has probably not been that great, but maybe the async communication style has been helpful.
Helpful for what? Sorry, exactly.
Oh, I was kind of talking to Casey about like, I think you've seen the tooling evolve where synchronous communication has gotten probably a lot better.
It's funny, like just a little anecdote, like the one thing about, and I do so many PR reviews and stuff every day, I lose count sometimes, but the one thing I have found, you know, that's true is like PRs are like the worst place to convey like subtlety and emotion. Like it's so easy to come off like a total jerk or whatever on a PR when you really didn't mean to, and you're just like, oh, like I have to be so careful with my wording on PRs to not sound like I'm just like totally dumping on whatever they did. Like I'm just like, oh, you know, this is not meant to be like a personal attack. It's just, this was a typo or whatever. You know? So that's the one problem with it, I would say. I do think that there's some big advantages to it in terms of obviously like the distraction factor, because one of the problems with Slack or anything like that is just like you're trying to get something done and you're getting like 5 Slacks every minute. You're like, what's going on? You know, like I can't do anything. And I don't want to totally turn it off, although sometimes that's your only choice. But yeah, I think that, you know, that's the one thing with it. It's funny, like I've almost abandoned email, I think, in a way at work. Like it's all noise now. It's all like automatic, I don't know, messages from the build system and stuff. Occasionally it's like a company announcement or something, but it's like, well, okay, whatever. You have to like sift through the sort of HR stuff that I actually are supposed to read, you know, and have to do something about. They have to, you know, bold and say action required on the subject for any of us to pay attention. It seems like anyone has some of those.
Yeah, I don't know. I think for like getting back to like just peer reviews and like communication style, I remember there was this fantastic, I went to like a Rails conf, like probably like, oh God, like 4 years ago or something. And this person who worked, I think at Pivotal, gave a talk about peer reviews and code reviews in particular. And he spent a very long time talking about how you basically have to think that whoever's going to read what you're going to write is going to read it in the most negative and offensive way possible.
For sure, for sure.
And so you should almost construct your feedback in a way where that's just the norm. And that way, like, you're kind of covering the case where, since there's so little context around what you're saying and how you're saying it, you're covering the case where this person won't get like offended or like be defensive about something, and you're just really making a suggestion or trying to help.
I also wanted to add that, like, in addition to, yeah, being like extra careful with your words and like how you communicate things in the PR itself, one thing I found helpful is to like leave a PR review and then like Slack or message the person out of band somewhere and say like, hey, I left a review, like, let me know if you have any questions, like, and like, it's a little, I find it a little bit easier to be more casual and like offer a little bit more of the context of where I'm coming from with my review than I do in the PR review itself, though I'll like try to include some of that there. Like, usually in the PR review, I'll say like, oh, like, I think there's like a couple of things to think about, but then I think we're good to go, or like, this looks great, there's just like a couple small things I want to like tweak, or I just have some questions. But like in like Slack DM or something else like that, I'll say, oh, hey, like, I took a look at this PR, like, I had some questions, or like, I didn't really understand this part, and like, maybe we can talk about it sometime soon, or like, just let me know if my feedback didn't make sense for some reason. I don't know. I found like that multi-band sort of PR response really helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, Lindsay, kind of like what you were saying, like there's almost something inherently antagonistic to like leaving feedback that way, which is really weird because it's like such a core feature of like any like shared code repository that you're going to work with. And the stakes, I think, have in a way gone up with, like, if you think about GitHub's approval system, like the way that you use that like really says a lot, and you can really like make people feel bad or reduce productivity if you don't use it in a way that everyone feels on the same page about, specifically like requesting changes and blocking a PR. I found that, like, you know, like Evelyn was saying, like kind of doing the like off the record approach, if you can, like, I don't know, that makes so much more sense to me. And you actually get to have a dialogue about it that isn't in public and feels like a public shaming of some sort.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think people have this reflex, especially on like, if a page is rendered in a browser and more than 4 people can look at it, they have like what's called the bulletin board response, which is like, no, what, that's ridiculous. How could you say such a thing? Somebody's wrong on the internet. I have to defend myself at all costs. This is absurd. And then if you directly message that person, they act totally differently. And so I feel like, I think Evelyn's approach is like, go for the avoid that, like, somebody's wrong on the internet, like gut action instinct, and just like go for the like not publicly displayable intimate chat where you're like nothing bad could possibly happen. And I've definitely had those with people who've written like PRs that I definitely felt like aren't going to work. And I think the idea is like, what you can do is you can always take that information, like distill it down to a less offensive possibly way of saying it, and put it in the PR for others to see after it's been like sort of sanitized and like vetted by the other person. Because I feel like a PR is kind of like a public place, even on a team with only 5 people, but like a chat is kind of a lot better of a place to address possibly very critical feedback. So.
But one thing that I think PRs point out, and always, you know, always surprises me, even though I should know better, is it's like the assumptions that I made that I thought were obvious to everybody, that it's just like, oh yeah, we did this for this reason, and it should be done, continue to be done for that reason. And then when somebody like goes off and does something completely different, or like duplicates all that stuff in some totally different way, it's easy to have that reaction like, what's wrong with you? Like, don't you know like the lore of our PR civilization here that we've been curating, you know, whatever, which is just silly, you know. It's just like, well, of course they didn't know, because it's just all in your head and made up. But yeah, you have to, that's an easy thing to fall into, where it's just like, you know, we have our little way around the campfire here, and anybody who comes in and like upsets that way, well, we're going to cast them out, you know, make them feel bad.
All right, so let's switch topics. We could probably go back to dev stuff at some point if we have extra time, for sure. This is more about collaborating with people who aren't developers on not developer things. So designers, product owners, product managers, your manager, people, you know, at work that aren't any of those things and might be, you know, other staff. Does anyone have any kind of things they've done or tools they've used?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this. I mean, like everyone in those job descriptions has like tools that they gravitate toward, and like engineers also have their own tools. And what I think is really cool about the tool chain for product management and design is that they're designed to be opened up and shared with others. I'm not sure that you could say the case for like sharing code. If you think about Sketch or what's the new one, Figma, InVision, Jira, Pivotal Tracker, like they're all designed for large teams. And I think what has worked really well for me is like becoming an expert at how to use those tools. And like, I feel like I have a pretty good acumen on, say, Pivotal Tracker, reasonably well, depending on like a Jira setup, and like some working knowledge of how to like use Figma and explore a mock. And the more you can get into that, I think you'll have less communication breakdown for sure. And you can even like give a feedback loop about things that are, maybe not working well, or things that could be done a little bit differently, essentially to the team's taste.
Yeah, I guess I'll go back to like the screen share does everything kind of too, where if you don't necessarily have access or licenses to those tools, screen share lets you look at a lot of those things pretty easily. So a good screen share tool like allows you to collaborate with people with tools that you either don't have a license for, don't know how to use, things like that. I've noticed though there's a lot of like developer designer bridge tools, things like Abstract, which is around change control for designs, Zeppelin, which makes CSS for your sketch designs and things like that. And I've definitely found those tools to be helpful. And those are kind of something we use pretty much all the time in the in-person world. And I find their like usefulness on the remote world to be still useful. I guess that was a really crappy way of saying that, but they still work pretty well. I've definitely used like just straight up like Google Docs and stuff too. I find these helpful for like developer interactions too, where you need to like plan something out or like architect something or write out a list of things or have some kind of shared place to write stuff or draw or, make a diagram or something like that. And I think like just the real-time collaborative editing aspect of them, even if they're only text or only a spreadsheet or something, really makes them super valuable, even if they're basically just Microsoft Word in your browser.
Yeah, we use Google Docs quite a bit, and it's funny because we definitely make a lot of use of comments sometimes, and that it can be really good if it's in a certain like window of time when everybody sort of has that document open. And there's been a couple cases though when there's just so many comments, it's just like you can't even see them all anymore. It's just ridiculous. But we definitely overuse it sometimes. But it can be good in the moment when the doc is in a sort of feverish sort of collaborating mode. And I find it, it's quite a successful tool if everybody participates and actually pays attention and follows up. If you don't really have people's attention, then it doesn't really matter, because it's just like yet another communication channel that not everybody might be using, but if everybody is, it's pretty effective.
Yeah, definitely got a lot better at Google Docs and spreadsheets recently. And my rule of thumb is like if I ever leave a comment for someone or like at them in a Google Doc or spreadsheet, I will also DM them and be like, hey, I left you a comment over here. I don't trust like Google Docs notifications to make it to anybody. Yeah.
Good policy,
I mean, Casey, you were kind of being kind of dismissive about email, but I definitely find email to be really helpful for like collaboration with non-engineers, especially around like a shared logistics like discussion of some kind, where, oh, let's make this, like, it's basically like you want to use email threads ability to be like a chain of like email, like a chain of messages that are kind of nested within each other, so that like it's pretty clear that the authoritative version is the most recent thing, and then you kind of have to like, I mean, you sort of have to backward merge them back together to figure out what's going on. But like, it seems like it's a very easy and like very common tool, and it's a tool that like you don't need any kind of permission to use with anyone else, right? So like Google Docs are, I mean, their permissions aspects are probably one of their features, but they're also a problem when you actually want to integrate like a whole bunch of people or possibly organizations into doing a single thing.
Yeah, I miss the old days of, really, and they still exist, but it used to be sort of everything was on mailing lists, and especially in the public sort of sphere and open source and whatever. And that was sort of a, I say, nostalgic moment to think about, like how much time I spent just emailing random people I never met, about whatever they were dealing with or helping them or getting help or whatever. That's actually pretty effective.
I've been kind of taking a pretty aggressive stance toward email and like making it useful again.
Yeah, you have to.
I registered the account use only for online orders at gmail.com. And then whenever I perform any kind of order online, I just use that email, and I basically never check it unless I'm like, where's my order? Like, it's very opt-in. Because I think like a lot of these companies, right, they kind of make email worse because the marginal cost of sending you an email is 0 for them, and you might get other features out of them via email. So like, hey, having OpsGenie tell me when our site's down is helpful. Getting a marketing email from Atlassian is not helpful. But the fact is they have your email address already, right? They've kind of tainted it. So I don't know, it's a tricky problem that I feel like, I don't know if it has a good solution, but like sanitary practices I found to be very helpful.
I'd like to throw another couple options at the anti-email spectrum.
Oh yeah, go for it. I mean,
so no one mentioned Dropbox Paper or Notion, which they all kind of do the same thing as G Suite and G-Docs, but they do them slightly different ways. And I guess depending on like the way that your organization is structured, pricing will be different or more efficient. But personally, I like Notion a lot because it's Markdown based. There really isn't that many different things that you can do with it compared to like a Google Doc. It's a little more predictable. And personally, I find the information architecture and like discovery of documents to be way better. So if you are working on a project with a team, and you don't want to just use story tracking as like your kind of like house of information, I find that that's a really good way to find the thing that you're looking for if you don't really know where else to look.
I don't find, so I think Notion is, I find Notion to be more useful than Dropbox Paper. I don't really know what Dropbox Paper does other than be a nicer looking Google Docs, but Notion,
I like the Dropbox Paper a lot. It's like it's like a stripped down Google Docs. And like,
but it's like a lot of, I just feel like administratively, like most companies have a Google administrative account, and like the burden of having another license and all this other stuff just seems not as worth it. But I also don't want
to have a Dropbox account or not. Like lots of companies already do.
Oh yeah, I don't use Dropbox for I don't think anything. I think I literally got an email from Dropbox telling me that my personal account was getting closed because I never use it. So.
There's also a website called hackmd, I think, .com or just hack.md, which is basically like collaborative doc editing, but like in a pretty like very basic markdown editor. So I don't know. I think that's another one like worth considering if you don't want to go like a full featured like everything route.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like whatever people prefer and whatever makes sense, but I think these, I don't know, to me they're all just like more, it's like some like addition or subtraction of things in Google Docs or something like that. And I had a friend who said that all games are essentially Magic the Gathering with some rules changed or something. And I feel like that's kind of similar, where it's like Google Docs is kind of it's a benchmark, but it's not, it doesn't actually fit everyone's use cases. And things like Notion and Paper and stuff are fine, but I don't know. I think whatever, it's fine. I think collaborative real-time inside browser doc editing is really the main thing. And the fact that it's Google Docs or Notion or something is not particularly important to me, but might be important to some people. And I'm just gonna steamroll that. Oh yeah, this is kind of an interesting one. Tapping people on the shoulder is now like pretty much offensive. So I guess, how do people handle not being able to just get a hold of somebody easily? Like in the office, I could just walk up to, John Q, coworker, and prod them and say, hey, can you help me with this thing?
Really hard.
Oh yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
So Brandy, you're probably the best person to do this because you as, primarily a managerial person, you kind of communicate with people and do stuff via other people, right? Like,
Well, the worst part of it, I just want to say, is that you can no longer ask someone else to tell you if that person is around or not. Like now, I mean, everyone is an individual and they're all obscure, and you have to hunt each person down individually, which is really, it's really hard. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, you do a lot of viewing of calendars and just like, you know, pinging
that's
to
a good,
track people down.
that's a good like mention. I think like having an accurate calendar has never been more important to the productivity of a company than right now. Just because like I have no idea what people are doing or where they are. Like, and if they have some like documented evidence of what they plan on doing or what they might be doing, it's extraordinarily helpful to know their whereabouts. So I've definitely like I've tried to do this, I'd say, before the virus thing pretty well, but I've definitely like tried to use people's calendars as truth in terms of when they're available and when they're not. And I think like it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you expect that people's calendars are accurate and they're not, they're almost incentivized to make them accurate. So I think
yeah, I'd echo that. I think the last place I worked at Heroku, I was a manager, and we had this sort of, and we were, as I said, like distributed remote. And yeah, having an update calendar just became like, I never really cared before that too much because I was an IC and people would just schedule stuff for me and I would show up, you know, whatever. It wasn't really I was doing a whole lot of coordinating compared to later. And once I became the coordinator, it became super important to me to have like a calendar that was not only like up to date, but like just devoid of anything that I actually didn't care about, and like aggressively going in and making sure things were marked as I'm going, I'm not going. Those kind of things in my free busy time was exported, or whatever all those things in my work hours were, you know, explicitly set up. And when people ask me now, like, hey, can I, you know, is your calendar up to date? I almost like have to stop myself from being offended. I'm like, my calendar up to date? How dare you? Of course it is, you know. But yeah, it's super important, I think, to have that.
I feel like I haven't been too shy about DMing people on Slack specifically. And maybe I should be. Maybe I should be more self-conscious about just throwing someone a message. But kind of my assumption is that if you're on Slack, then, I don't know, in a manner of speaking, you're receptive to messages. I'm very much like, if I don't want to be bothered on Slack, I will shut it down. And I don't have notifications go on my phone. So I don't know, for me, business as usual almost. If I really want to talk to a specific person, I will do that. If I really want feedback in a channel, like if I'm stuck on a problem and I need engineers to help me out, I may or may not do an at here, depending on how severe it is. But yeah, I feel like maybe I've become more wordy online than in person as a result of this. And I don't know if that bothers other people or not. No one's told me it has.
I don't know. Reading something that somebody wrote takes far less time than listening to them. So I think being wordier in writing is a little more acceptable than being wordier in person.
I think like for me, like, yeah, I'll definitely DM people. And I don't know, the people I usually am coordinating with the same like 7 to 10 individuals. So like by now I have some sense of what their schedule usually is. And like I rarely expect them to respond immediately to anything I need, and like that's usually fine. Like if something's on fire, then like and they are not available, or like I'll like wait, you know, some time to like talk to someone, and if they're like just not around, then like I'll just do whatever I think is like best given what I know. And there's something I was going to mention about that. Yeah, I mean, like I think, and oh, and if I think people are probably after hours, or just like not there right now, sometimes I'll prepend my DM with like not urgent : like, what do you think about this thing? Just to be like, please don't worry about this unless you're like looking for something to think about. And then one other thing I want to mention that we've been doing in the GitHub Slack is we have like a little emoji key for like levels of capacity for like then. So we'll use like different weather symbols, like sunny for like full capacity, and then like cloudier and cloudier for like less capacity. And that's just supposed to be like a general indicator of like how available you are in general, or like how much capacity you have to like take on stuff. Just like as a way to be like super, as transparent as possible about what your schedule is currently like, or like what time of day you're in, or how many other things you have going on that day that are like maybe aren't even work related, but are just like definitely going to impact your ability to respond to stuff.
Okay, so like mental health in general, we've put it to the end and don't have much time for it. So let's maybe just talk about this a bit. I think the main one I want to know kind of is, this is the one I want to get to as fast as possible, which is, this is for like, I think Evelyn and Casey mostly, because you've worked remote before the in-plaguing, and I'm kind of curious how is this different than working remotely under non-global pandemic circumstances? Like, is there things that are worse, things that are better, things that are different? Because I don't really know that well.
Yeah, I can take that to start. I think that, it's different in some sort of external and internal aspects for sure. Like, there's sort of good and bad, because at home, like, more people are here. My oldest son is home from college because his college is remote now. And my other son who's in high school is here because they're also doing remote school. My wife works at the high school, and they haven't, the building's not even open. So she's been doing like remote stuff as well. So they're here, and that took a little getting used to, just because I was sort of used to it just being me and the dog, like hanging out and working. And now I'm feeling back to full productivity with like just a different situation, because being a human, like you just, change is a little hard to adapt to like immediately. So it took a week or so to totally get used to that new schedule. And so like things like internet being used a little bit more at times, or like not as much hot water in the morning for a shower, that kind of stuff, as more people are, silly things like that to get used to redoing your schedule. On the external side, I think it's interesting to see how like, the whole company, which I was really in the minority in terms of being remote. There was only a few of us, and now everybody is. And it took folks quite a while, it just was very suddenly thrust on them that, no, you can't come to the office anymore. And so folks had to set up their, their work environments and just get their schedule back together and get their life, in order and whatever. And yeah, I think it's getting back to like a pretty productive set, but it was pretty disruptive for everybody. And just trying to keep on keeping on my side, just sort of, support people as much as I could. And, I think my core tenet in life is just keeping a good sense of humor about things, because no matter how like weird or like absurd things get, like that's the thing that keeps you going. So trying to be kind and keep a sense of humor about it all is really an important thing too.
Yeah, so like with GitHub, like things are mostly like majority remote already. So like there was some, I think, shift for other people in the workforce that weren't already remote in our company. But I think maybe like less of one than has been for like other companies. I think, and this is like something I have to keep reminding myself, at least for, I don't know, me and maybe others too, that working from home like during a pandemic is like very different from just like working from home. Like sure, like logistically maybe there's some things that are similar, but like there's a lot of shit going on right now. And like I think that at least for me, like my mental state or like resilience or like coping capacity or like spoon count is like definitely lower than it normally is by like, I mean, it depends like week to week how much lower. And I definitely feel like I've acclimated some over the last like 45 days or whatever it's been now in LA. But it's still like, it's still more precarious, I think, at least for me, like mentally, than I think it normally is. And I think part of that too is, for some, I think some people like when they work from home, they tend to stay like in home. And for me, like it used to be like I will work from home and like also like other places nearby. And so I think for me, that was a bit of an adjustment too. But I don't know. I think like even if we were all going into our offices or like working the way we normally do without any other like, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of hard to disentangle these things, but I think all things the same somehow. Like a pandemic is still like a pretty psychologically stressful event for like everybody involved, which is everybody. So I think like, I don't know. Yeah, I think comparing it to like, oh, if all this stuff was happening and like I was still going into an office or like doing the same thing I always did, like it would still be like pretty stressful and like, I don't know. So that was like a really long way of saying like, I have to keep reminding myself this is not like you don't have to treat this as if it's like a normal sort of like work time or like work day or like time of life in any sort of sense.
So there's like a cost to the pandemic that's like vague and not specific, but you're well aware of it, and you're kind of like cutting yourself some slack in the regards of like, oh, there's a global pandemic going on, so like, you know, not having all your spoons in your spoon drawer or whatever. I don't know.
Spoon theory is like, spoons are like a unit of like emotional energy. So like if you're low on spoons, you like don't have much like emotional capacity to like spend or give out or like take on things. And so like having a lot of spoons is like, yeah, the opposite of that. So yeah, if you Google spoon theory, like it's like, that's about as complicated as it gets, but that's the thing.
I just imagine, I have these pictures of Casey like and his dog just like living it up, and then like all these people coming back and like cramping your style.
A little bit,
you
but
and the dog,
it's all good
you
now.
and the dog both taking like hour-long showers, like the dog like looking disgruntledly at your children, your wife, because you know he wanted a long shower too. Like, all right, yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm realizing is like this is not normal. And like to Evelyn's point, like cutting yourself a little bit of slack is totally like appropriate. Just like basically don't go crazy or die of the pandemic is like your main goals. Like everything else is kind of like ancillary.
Yeah, I think that the funny thing is that for some people, not dying of the pandemic is not as hard as like not losing your head, not like losing your mental stability in the process of that.
Yeah, it's a crazy trade-off that I think is somewhat unique to this.
Everyone's got different risk profiles. We have different attack vectors, if you will.
Chris, thank you. You asked the question, you talked, you're the best attendee ever, for sure.
The whole time. I want to give a round of applause for Chris.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It was great. I appreciate all the information. So yeah, appreciate
I'm glad that the Chattanooga like aspect came through in a big way. So that's awesome. Yeah, I don't know. I think this was pretty fun. I think people are kind of learning a lot about this stuff. And I think it's been, I don't know, it's been interesting. It's been kind of weird for sure. So.
Yes, all those things. I wanted to say thanks. I think that this was a lot of fun. It's really fun to get to know you all, and you know, feel free to keep in touch or ping me if you want.
I have a Twitter now. I am now available
awesome.
via this crazy platform that people like better than email, but is, you know, a tool for oppression. But that's fine.
My problem with Twitter is that it never seems to improve my mood. Like I go looking on there and I'll laugh
I think it's
a
like
little bit.
smoking.
Yeah,
it's like
wow, I need to go there.
As soon as you do it, you want to quit it, but like you do it
myself?
because it's cool.
Yeah, it is good for keeping in touch with certain people directly. I do use it for that, and that's pretty helpful.
Okay, maybe I'll use it as like email part 6 or whatever it is. I don't know. So. All right, I guess we should probably